Next, we have Jules Maltz. Jules is a venture capitalist at Institutional Venture Partners, where he has led investments in Buddy Media, Dropbox, Indiegogo, Retail Me Not, and TuneIn. He was also actively involved in IVP's investments in General Assembly, Living Social, Marketo, NGMoco, Pop Sugar, Twitter, and Yext. Jules and I happened to graduate the same year from the Stanford Graduate School of Business, but unlike me, he was a Siebel scholar as well as an R.J. Miller scholar, which means he not only did his homework, but he was certifiably smarter than I am. So it is, oh, and also, Jules is recently the proud father of a new baby boy. So please help me welcome Jules Maltz.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So, as Nir mentioned, the real reason I'm here is because I was lucky enough to meet him 6 years ago. We were not studying the habit of drinking out of red cups. We were actually working on a business together, and this was us making our first dollar along with his wife, Julie. So this is one of the best times of my life. It was just a few blocks from here when we started the business. The business didn't turn into a huge success, but we both learned a lot. And really proud to be here speaking to y'all. So I'm going to talk about 5 things today. I'm going to talk briefly about IVP. I'll give you a brief commercial. I'll talk about unicorn investing, because I think that's our business. I'll talk about growth versus retention, which I think is one of the most important things. Entrepreneurs tend to overemphasize growth and underemphasize retention. I think we're all here because we believe in retention and habits. And if you don't believe that, I'm going to convince you why. We'll talk then about how to create habits, at least from a venture capitalist perspective. And then finally, we'll talk about the money metrics. These are metrics that you ought to use in your businesses when you're pitching venture capitalists that can help you explain the retention of your company. So IVP, we've been doing this a long time. We were actually started by a Stanford Business School grad in the 50s. Started our first fund called IVP in 1980. We raised $22 million as a fund in that year. That was about a quarter of all venture capital raised in 1980, so our market share has decreased, but luckily we've continued to grow. We've raised about $4 billion cumulatively, and a number of our portfolio companies mentioned. We have a $1 billion fund currently. We focus about half on consumer, half on enterprise. We're different than most venture firms in that we only look for later stage companies, typically with more than $10 million of revenue or phenomenal growth like Twitter and Snapchat. We're mostly in the United States, 6 partners, and we've had 300 companies that we've invested in, with over 97 of them that have gone public. We actually have 3 companies on file to go public, so we're hoping for 100 soon. So excited to be doing that. I think our key business is unicorn investing. How many people know the concept of a unicorn when it comes to investing, at least? How many people know a real unicorn? I don't know. Okay. So this is a concept that actually a great venture capitalist, Aileen Lee from now Cowboy Ventures, came up with. But she defined a unicorn as a company that eventually will be worth more than $1 billion. And this is really important to venture capital because there are over 30,000 companies each year, but only a very small portion of them, maybe 10 to 15 each year, become worth more than $1 billion, and that's where the vast majority of venture capital returns come from. We have more than the 80-20 rule. We have like the 99-1 rule. In fact, since 2003, there have been 39 companies that have been worth more than $1 billion. I think this is just software and internet. Today, you're seeing about billion-dollar fundraisings every week, so this is probably more than 39. We've been lucky enough to invest in 7. And I think there are about 5 characteristics that I think really define a unicorn company. First, it has to go after a big market. You can't create a billion-dollar business unless you're going after a big market. You have to have a great team, not only a great founding team, but hire the people that can scale your business from 50 to 500. You need to have a differentiated product, competitive barriers to entry. You need to be going through hyper growth. You can't start going $1 million of revenue and then 1.5 and 2. You'll never get there. And then I think the most important thing is that you need to have high retention of either users or customers. And again, that's why we're talking here today. And high retention really means you have to develop habits. So in this section, I'm going to convince you that growth is actually less important than retention. If you talk to most entrepreneurs, They'll tell you just grow as fast as you can, burn as much money as possible. It's all about growth. And I really think as a venture capitalist, in the long term, it's about retention. Are you really providing a service that's keeping users engaged and sticky? And to illustrate that, I put together a little bit of example. There's some math in this presentation, so bear with me. But imagine a company, Company A, that is adding 10 million users per month. So it's growing really fast. It has 90% monthly retention, so not bad. 90% is pretty good. 3 years later, if you look at the graph, it tops out at about 100 million, slightly less than 100 million users, and it's flat. Now, Company B is a slower growing company. It's only growing 5 million users per month, so 50% as much as Company A. But it has 99% retention. So it keeps 99 every 100 users every month, still losing some users, but it's a very sticky product. And look what happens 3 years later. It started off slower, but it then surpassed Company A. It's got 150 million users, and it's scaling really fast. So I put together this 2x2 matrix just to illustrate these different situations. So you can imagine that a company can either be a low-growth company or a high-growth company, and then it can be a low-retention company or a high-retention company, meaning very sticky. Now, if you're low retention and you're low growth, you're not really going anywhere. So I picked my animal. I picked as a sloth. I apologize if anyone loves the sloth animal, but I didn't think it was kind of going anywhere, so that's what I picked. Now, on the top left, if you've got high growth, you're that Company A type of business, but you've got low retention, you're a hare or a rabbit. You're running really fast, but you're getting tired out. If you're in the bottom right-hand corner, you've got high retention but low growth, you're slow and steady, you're a tortoise. And for those who remember the parable of the tortoise and the hare, you eventually pass that hare, you end up building a big company. And then finally, if you're magic and you've got both high retention and high growth, you've got a great shot at being a unicorn. And I'm going to talk about some case studies of companies that were both hare companies, tortoise companies, and then finally a unicorn. So who remembers Plaxo more than 10 years ago? I see a bunch of hands. Okay. So Plaxo was a darling of Silicon Valley, and it had incredibly high growth. The business grew to over 10 million users, which at the time was very, very strong. It started before LinkedIn. A lot of people don't remember that. But it was a business that was built on, in some sense, spamming your address book and getting people to add you and making sure that your address book was always updated. But you were getting Plaxo notifications multiple times a day with very little value. Now, just up the road, there was a little bit company that started a year later. It was smaller. It started out smaller for actually the first 3 or 4 years, and that's LinkedIn. And this is a tortoise company that eventually grew larger than the hare. And you can see by Google Trends, it's a little bit striking. In 2005, Plaxo was actually greater than LinkedIn if you zoomed in over here. And now it's obviously no contest. LinkedIn's a $22 billion company. So just because you're behind a competitor, they're growing faster than you, if you're actually focused on retention, you can build a bigger business in the long term. A couple recent examples. So Vidi. Vidi was a very popular, kind of the Instagram of video right after Instagram sold. Vidi launched. That business grew to over 3 million daily active users in just about a month. Very strong service, but it was really leveraging Facebook's Open Graph, not building a sustainable service that was lasting. So you had this situation where it looked even worse than Company A. It was growing users rapidly, but there was no retention. Then it started growing users at a much lower pace. Engagement, DAU is daily active users. The daily active users as a percentage of monthly active users declined, which is a good indication of low engagement, and the business ultimately had a poor outcome. I was going to talk about another company that I think could be a tortoise company. So Vidi is a hare company. What are companies that are tortoise businesses? And I think one very good candidate is Nextdoor. How many people are on Nextdoor? Use it? Maybe it's a unicorn company. A lot of people are on it. So, but this is a business that, in some sense, started off really testing. It's a social network for neighborhoods. It started off for the first year or two not focused on growth, really focused on trying to get the usage experience right for everybody. And because of that, it's now in a position where I believe the service is highly retentive, and it's off to the races and valued at more than $500 million. And then finally, one of my favorite case studies is a clear unicorn company. This is WhatsApp. I'm sure we'd all love to repeat this, but this is a business that grew to more than 400 million users in 4 years. But the most important statistic about WhatsApp and what's not as reported in the press is the chart on the right. This is daily active users as a percentage of monthly active users. You remember from Vidi it was quite low. Here it's 72% for WhatsApp. So meaning 72% of their monthly active users are using the product every single day. That's more than Facebook, more than Instagram, more than Twitter and Snapchat. So this is the matrix once again. Focus on being a tortoise company. It's better than being a hare, but if you can be a unicorn, that's great too, and we can talk later because those are the ones we want to invest in. So how do you create habits? So now that we've talked about you need to get retention, how do you actually make sure that in your business you're creating a highly retentive service and focusing on that first and foremost? So the things a VC wants to see around retention are four things as follows. They want to see you have really a great product. They want to see that that product is being used in a high-frequency manner, that a lot of people are using it day after day after day. They want to make sure there's infinite variability. And then finally, they want to make sure that users are getting increased value over time. The more they use the service, the more important it becomes to their life. And so I put together these four things, and I swear this is how it occurred. I looked at Near's hooked model, and it almost exactly matches the hooked model. These are my top four. In the hooked model, which Near talked about earlier, you've got a trigger, which is often can be a result of a great product. You've got an action, which is, again, keeping people utilizing it in a high-frequency way. A reward, which is where infinite variability comes in. And then an investment phase, which is what delivers the high value over time. So I'm going to talk about a couple case studies and examples of each of these four areas. So first, building a great product. The best entrepreneurs really focus on solving pain, making sure that they're building a service that users are demanding, that it's a pull market, that users are looking for their product, as opposed to that product really needs to be pushed to the users. And there's a concept about creating painkillers or aspirins instead of vitamins. You want to create a product that really is, somebody really cares about wanting that product. And that product should also be authentic. I think this is something that I think in business school they don't teach you as much, but the best businesses are often created by entrepreneurs who are scratching their own itch, who are solving their own pain, and who really are authentic to that business. They know a lot about the market they're in. They're not in a business school classroom designing, we really need to go into this market because this is the dynamic. They really feel it or understand the customers directly. So one of the examples of this is Dropbox. We're an investor there. Drew Houston, when he started the business, it really came from his desire to, he was on a bus going from Boston to New York. He left his flash drive at home. He couldn't complete his work. And he said, I think I'll build a cloud storage service. And that's what ultimately led him to build Dropbox. Mark Zuckerberg was thinking the same thing when he created Facebook. Travis Kalanick from Uber, just wanted to go and get an easy ride. So building authentic services, I think, are really core for entrepreneurs and one thing VCs really look for. So second, you need to build something that's going to have high frequency. I really like this 2x2 matrix. This is done by Flurry. This shows for just mobile apps, but you could do this for other services, the frequency of use per week charted against retention over 90 days. And so obviously you want something that's high frequency of use and then also high retention. But really to get frequency of use, they're often in services that we need to use every day. To get to 7 times a week or 6 or 7 times a week, they're in things like communications, which is clearly critical, social networking's up there, and then a lot of entertainment. Things around social gaming are quite important as well. VCs often think about giving you the home screen test, especially if you're a mobile app. So can you have an app or a product that is so important to the users and will be used so frequently that they need to put it on their home screen? You have limited real estate, often 20 to 30 applications you're going to put on your home screen, except for the people that create categories of like 30 nested applications. But let's imagine you don't do that. You're going to have, you really need to be one of these services on the home screen. And again, you can see here, I think this is maybe, well, it's not the standard one, but a lot of stuff around music, messaging, really in those categories are going to have the highest frequency of use. And the reason frequency is so important is this concept called the forgetting curve. So there was a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. He lived in the 19th century, and he was an expert in memory. I think probably the world's greatest memory expert to date. And this curve is a little complicated, but he came up with this concept that It's pretty simple. Once we remember something, the longer it has been since the time we remembered it, we forget it more, right? Which is a pretty easy concept, right? But then what I thought was interesting about what his research showed is that you can prevent this loss of memory, by doing a repetition quickly after you've remembered something. So if everybody remembers when we were here at school, a lot of times when we study, we take notes in class, and then we wait till the last day right before the quiz, and then we study all our notes, and then we do poorly because we've forgotten that class that we took 8 weeks ago. Ebbinghaus would tell you what you have to do is you take notes in your class, and then the next day, you quiz yourself. You study those notes. And then the day after that, you quiz yourself again. So you have lots of these repetitions. People who are memory champions, they have contests. That's how they can memorize a full deck of cards or other things, is through these types of things. So how is this relevant for startups? Well, if someone downloads your application, let's say it's a travel app, and then doesn't use it within the first day or the second day, you can't expect them 6 months later or a year later to remember they downloaded it. You need to create repetitions over and over again. So one of our portfolio companies, I think, does the best job of this. Near said, we have a baby. We're now looking for nannies. We signed up for Care.com, which is one of our portfolio businesses. They've sent me, in my first 5 days of signing up, they've sent me 10 emails. I signed up for the service. I paid for it. They already have my money, but they need me engaged in the service. So they're making sure, because I'm probably not spending enough time in it, getting me engaged. Now, it feels a little spammy, but if they don't get me engaged, they lose me likely for the renewal in 3 months. The third thing you need as a product is infinite variability. So most of the highly retentive apps are ones that change all the time. That's why we see things in communications or news or even the weather. I know it's raining right now, but weather apps have infinite variability. You really need to keep users hooked to wanting to come back to the service because they don't know what's going to be there. A company that does this, I think, really well is Flipboard. Flipboard's merged both your social interactions along with news. There's constant variability in the website. You're always coming back. Companies that have more finite variability are the social games companies. This is a curve showing monthly active users over time. You can tell by the slope of the curve that the users are decreasing. This was Zynga. Farmville is the largest yellow piece there. So Farmville had a lot of engagement initially, but then the gameplay became, people were used to the gameplay. And so over time, there's less variability, even though maybe some things changed, and people lose interest. So games often have finite variability. That's okay. You just need to make sure you're monetizing users within the first few months often, and come out with new games. Draw Something is also an example of a company that went through the same thing. Zynga obviously knew what these curves look like, so they did make an acquisition of this business. But one of the interesting things about Draw Something is it had some of the highest daily active user retention numbers. So people were coming back often 5 times a day, 10 times a day within the first few days. And it had one of the highest growth apps. So it was high growth, high retention, but it was finite variability. People didn't want to play a Pictionary game for a month or 2 months. It's the same reason that you might really get hooked on Monopoly and you want to play it, one night in a row and then the next night with your kids, but you're not going to play Monopoly 3 months in a row. So it's the same thing with Draw Something. Finally, you need to have increasing value over time. This means the more time someone uses the service, the more invested they get in the service, the more important it becomes to them. I think Dropbox does a great example of this. Another company that does this very well is Evernote. This is Evernote's famous smile graph. Evernote noticed that once you sign up for Evernote, not everybody gets it. This is basically retention over time in terms of users coming back. Not everybody gets it, so a lot of people churn within the first 3 months. This curve is kind of going down, just like we saw in Draw Something or Farmville. But then what happens differently in Evernote is then about in years 1 to 2, people start coming back. And the reason is they've put more of their life in Evernote. They understand the service more. It's become more valuable to them, and they're re-engaging in it. So that's why this business is an incredibly healthy one because of that long-term retention and smile graph. And the smile graphs is a good kind of segue into the final section, which are money metrics. These are the metrics that you want to be showing VCs when you're raising money. Obviously, if you've got that smile graph, that's great. But I think a lot of times, people start out with a metric that I really don't like. And especially for mobile apps, that metric is cumulative downloads. So you see this all the time for mobile companies saying that I've got 200 million cumulative downloads. Apple and Tim Cook are saying they've got 60 billion cumulative downloads. This is a great stat for press, but it means nothing. It's a vanity metric. It's the same thing if somebody said, these are the number of people that once accessed my web page through a browser over the last 10 years. Doesn't matter, right? So what you really need to focus on is active users, and Facebook does a great job of this. If they showed how many people once came to their site, the metric would be like 1 trillion people. But they focus on active users, people that are actively going on a daily basis. So Facebook, just in the last quarter in Q4, 757 million people every day are using Facebook. That's a good metric of activity. As you're pitching VCs, focus on active users, either monthly active or daily active, depending on your product. The second thing to show VCs is cohort retention. So this is another way of showing those same graphs that I was showing for the Smile Curve or for Zynga. But this shows retention over time, starting at 100%. This was done by David Scott for SaaS companies. You can do this for any type of business, internet, SaaS, and enterprise business. These are how many people are coming back or continuing to pay you if you're actually focused on making money. Here in this example, the January 2011 cohort, so these are all divided up into cohorts, groups of users that joined at a certain time. So a group of users joined in January 2011, that's the bottom blue line. After 12 months, 55% of them are either still active or still paying, and that this company is getting better in terms of their cohorts over time. Another metric that is done by a company called Mixpanel, this is especially good for mobile apps, is this concept of addiction. It focuses, addiction hopefully in a good way, it focuses on how often or how much time users are spending in your app. So not only are they coming back, but are they really dedicated their time and lives to it. And for this particular company, which I think is hypothetical, 20% of users engage more than 8 hours per day. So this would be a highly addictive app. This is a histogram showing basically hours of usage. And then the final thing I'll leave you with is one of the most important metrics. So a lot of times you start and you focus on revenue. And this is what you show a VC. This is what we're most focused on. And I'm going to argue that this either looks really good or really bad. And the reason it could look really good or really bad is if you actually dive beneath what these top-line numbers are showing. So I'm going to show you just a hypothetical, the same graph for a company that's doing really well. This is the same chart, but this shows cohort revenue stacked over time. It's the same numbers, but in this case, this company signed up a cohort of users in January 2012. Those same users they signed up 2 years ago are still paying the same amount 2 years later. So it's a highly retentive revenue model. And all these bars stack on top of each other. So this company knows that when it signs up a user, they stay. Here's a company that has the same revenue chart, but is doing very poorly. And the reason is, if you look at the cohort numbers, all of them slope down. So this company is churning out its users. The only reason it's staying strong is because it's adding a lot of new users every month. But that can only last so long. So if I had to predict which company is going to do well or which company is going to do poorly, this is the one doing poorly. This is the one doing well. So I'd encourage, the one previously is the one doing well. So I'd encourage you, as you think about your revenue, really try to focus on cohort numbers. Try to make sure that you're really focused on becoming a tortoise business, not a hair company, and ideally becoming a unicorn. So with that, I'll take a few questions, and thank you very much. Any questions? Yes? Yes. Yes. I think Nir will send around the information. I'll talk about it after this. Yes. Hi. Yes. Yeah, no, well, one of the things that Care.com is most focused on is when you've got new nannies that have looked at your profile or they've sent an application, they're also telling you stuff around that. But I think that is important that they get that reward as well as just the early frequency. So the messaging companies, I think, do the best job of giving you an early reward. You sign up for Snapchat. You see, especially if you're 18 to 24 years old and you've got a lot of friends on the service, as soon as you sign up, there's going to be somebody who likely will see you and send you a photo. And so that's something that you get that reward just from joining a service, and that other people can find you. But yeah, I think a lot of companies need to focus on reward as well as just a frequency of engagement. Yeah?
So you're talking, with regards to infinite variability, how would you classify Uber? Because it's a very clear use case, fairly frequent. Where would you put them as tortoise, hare, not tortoise or unicorn, and in terms of infinite variability?
I think Uber has incredibly high retention from what I hear. So the more, just in my own usage, I started off, I used the product. I bet it's a little bit like the Evernote smile graph. Maybe you don't get it for the first month because you just downloaded it. But then pretty soon, if Uber becomes part of your life and the way you take transportation in San Francisco or in the Bay Area, you're going to be more and more retained and end up using it a lot more. So I see Uber really as like a different kind of company. It's almost like a utility. It's like the electricity, transportation. These are core things, and Uber's really become not only a home screen app for me, but something that's a lot of utility for my life. Yeah.
Extremely seasonal. So, in the case of consumer electronics, especially consumer hardware, you might have, 10% of your annual sales, right, all come in, or maybe like 80% of your annual sales might all come in December, right? So the graphs might not look nearly as clean.
Yeah,
what you're saying. So how do you, how would you sort of tweak those metrics, or how would you look at those curves, right?
Yeah. Well, the goal is for someone to purchase your product again and again, or purchase a new version of that. So let's say you're Apple, and you're going to sell a lot of your iPhones when either a new iPhone comes out or in the holiday season. If they're able to track it, they would look at annual revenue by customer over time, and has that increased or decreased, and that way they avoid the seasonality of it. So I think you can adjust for the seasonality by moving more towards annual metrics. But again, the key things for e-commerce companies or hardware companies are, does the person buy the next version of the hardware? And then if it's an app that also has a software component, it's the Nike Fuel Band. Do they measure that you are using the software once you've purchased the hardware? I think that's really key to measure that, and the last speaker spoke about that for the wearables. Great, thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Jules. Thank you.